first off, I want to say that this, since this one is about 10 ways to make your story stand out in a contest, this is generally just overarchingly kind of what I look for and what I think makes the best top winning stories. So as a result, take that with a grain of salt, if you will. If you want to go against one of the suggestions, that's totally fine, but this is what, in my opinion, as a professional editor and as a grader of these contests, what I am looking for and what I think is the most impressive when I see writing. I also want to mention that we have 3 more contests coming up. The Scary Story contest due the first week of October, the first chapter contest due the last week of November, and the Cozy Christmas Mystery contest due the 21st of December. So please keep that in mind. I am so excited for the rest of these contests. Now let's dive right in. The first thing I would say is to follow the rules. If there are rules or guidelines that have been posted, follow them. You would not believe how many times I have had to mention to someone, I'm sorry because you didn't follow this rule, or I'm sorry because you didn't follow this guideline. I wasn't able to count your story or qualify your story or different things like that, or I qualified your story for feedback and for a participation prize, but it was ultimately disqualified from the higher judging because of the fact that you didn't follow the rules. So, funnily enough, one thing that can make you stand out from the crowd is just following the rules, period. But that's just the bare minimum basics. The next thing is that the first line of the story really sets an impression for what the rest of the story is going to have in store for me as a judge and for a reader. The first line, I would say, generally has to have action, drama, or foreshadowing that pulls the reader into the story. Great examples of this are, like, if you want to start with a action scene that can be very dragging someone into the story. If you can do some drama, even if it's internal drama, like, I really don't like pickles on my sandwich, and this day has just gone from bad to worse, and then all of a sudden you start to talk about how bad their day has been, and then it turns out they're being cursed or something like that. That drama at the beginning is going to make us go, I wonder why their day is going so bad. I hope their day gets better. And that's going to pull us into the story. So having action or drama or internal dialogue that helps us get to know the character is going to help make things much more intense. Another thing you can do to simulate action without having real action is to show action of the world around them. So an example of that is, like, the wind crackled through the branches. That feels very ominous and mysterious. Nothing is happening with action or drama, but it feels like action because of the fact that it feels like it's setting it up for something. Therefore, it's dragging you into the story and pulling you in. Next thing I would say is that the characters are well developed and feel real. Now, this is hard to do within a first chapter or a short story, since those are our contest regulations. However, you still can well develop a character. The best way that I would say to well develop a character is to show, don't tell. The more you show through characters' actions what they are like, the more we are going to get to know the character. You can get to know someone by observing them, and that's what the reader's going to want to do. If you just tell us X, Y, Z fact, we're going to get bored. However, if you show us, they're being bullied by these people, instead of saying they are being bullied by these people, that's boring. It's not as intriguing, it's not as elaborate. And so as a result, it's much better to do something like they shoved them out of the way and they spilled everything all over and they feel like they're about to cry and tears are welling up in their eyes. That's showing, and we feel a lot more for that character than we do if you just tell us like a factoid in a textbook. It's going to feel a lot better if we can see it and we can feel their emotions more deeply. Next is the pacing. If the story is moving too fast or too slow, then that is going to affect how well I grade the story, because of the fact that pacing is incredibly important for keeping the attention of a reader. If the pacing is too slow and you're describing every bush and tree in intricate detail and never getting to the plot, then the reader gets bored, and that's ultimately not good. However, if you're going too fast and you're saying, I'm not even going to describe anything, I'm not even going to describe the character, I'm just going to go like, boom, they hit something, that's too fast. That's too confusing. And also, you don't want to skip all the good parts. Part of pacing is knowing what parts are good. Action parts are great. You don't want to say, they just hit them and then won. Like, show us the action scene. Show us more of that. Once again, this is more about how showing, not telling, is good. You can tactfully tell. That's kind of when the person almost narrates it, where they say, what was it? I had a story I edited recently that was really, really fantastic. With the line, it was like, if you haven't noticed, I don't like to talk about my feelings. It's like dealing with washing a cat or something like that. And it was like a really great way of telling us how she felt, but at the same time did it in a tactful way, gave us a metaphor to relate to and to kind of show and demonstrate how this telling feels to her. Speaking of which, it's a really good book. It's called Mid-Flight Vampire's Tale by Linda Lang. It's great. But anyway, point being that the pacing needs to reflect the story. If there's an action scene, you need to make sure it's quick and fast, but not too quick. If you skip the action scene, we're going to be upset. If you just say, and they won, that's skipping the action. We're going to be upset. Whereas if you go into the action scene for 7 pages, that's too much. So there's a fine balance. You want to make sure that it's short, but at the same time it still shows us the action scene in detail. And as far as getting to know the characters, you want to make sure that it is smooth and that it blends in and that you aren't just forcing getting to know the character. It may naturally make sense with the progression of the story. A great example of this is Lord of the Rings. Lord of the Rings actually does do a little bit too slow of pacing for modern day, but it is a good example of it because of the fact that they have to get the ring from point A to point B. So of course there's going to be a lot of downtime and a lot of time to get to know the characters. It just makes logical sense. Whereas if they tried to force that in there and said, oh yeah, he can go next door and get rid of the ring, but for some reason he's going to go on this adventure, that would be very confusing and wouldn't make sense. So make sure the pacing feels natural, but also make sure you show, don't tell. That is going to be the biggest thing that is going to help your pacing not be too fast and not be too slow. The next thing I want to mention is that sentences are easy to read and not confusing. If your sentences are really confusing and I can't quite understand what you mean, that is going to be much, much harder for me to enjoy the story because I'm too busy trying to interpret what you're trying to say. I would highly recommend reading it out loud and getting a friend or family member to read it for you and get some feedback on it if you're worried about your sentence structures being confusing. That would always be a good idea. Make sure, though, it's a friend or family member that you know will be honest with you and won't just say it's good and leave it at that. Like, they'll actually give you feedback because not everyone does. Next thing is that the basic formatting is followed. You have tabs at the beginning of paragraphs. You have paragraphs. I've seen stories where there are no paragraphs, and it makes it so much harder to read and so much more confusing. You also need to make sure that you have quotations around your dialogue. You need to make sure that you have action tags and dialogue tags. You need to make sure that you have basic formatting for time skips. You don't just say 2 years later all of the sudden. I mean, I should hope you're not skipping 2 years in a short story. That's too much. But point being, if you're skipping any amount of time in your story, you should probably have a gap between the paragraphs. You shouldn't just randomly skip time in the middle of a paragraph. Basic things like that. You can generally Google formatting rules. If you have any questions or would like more formatting, please comment that you would like a formatting thing. Or send an email to me. My email is cnielsen@americanfork.gov or cnielsen@americanfork.gov. If you send it there, it will immediately go to me and you can say, hey, I want that formatting document, and I can send it to you. I actually have lots of detail on that, and I tried to make it fun and entertaining. It's like the narrator's talking to you, kind of. Anyway, that being said, the next thing that makes a story stand out is that the concept is either super unique or told in an original way. I bet that you've probably seen a million different Cinderella retellings or various other fairy tale retellings. You probably know that your favorite fairy tale retellings will generally be ones that you haven't seen before, or ones that have a new or unique spin on a previous fairy tale, instead of just being the exact same story told over and over again. It's an original way of twisting the story. It's an original way of doing the characters. It's an original way of having their backstory, having unique aspects instead of just retelling the exact same story. You can take the same concept as someone else and retell it in a very original way. You just need to make sure that it is your way and not just retold with your own character. If you retell Cinderella and it's from the mice's perspective, that would be cool. Or if you wanted to retell Beauty and the Beast and you wanted to do it where he was, I don't know, like it was based in the Norse legend where there's a polar bear or things like that, that'd be cool. But if you just do the exact same thing as the cartoon Beauty and the Beast, you're gonna run into problems. Even if you change their names and the way they look, that's not enough. You need more to change the story and make it your own. Next is attention to detail and immersion. As I said, you want to make sure you're not dragging the readers along with too much detail, but you also want to make sure that you're not doing too little detail. If I don't have any idea what the room looks like, or I don't have any idea what the character is experiencing or feeling, that's a problem. I would say use at least 3 of the 5 senses in every case of description that you have. Using all 5 is even more preferred, but like I know you can't always do that. So using 3 at bare minimum, I would say helps with immersion. It helps the reader to feel more like the story is coming to life on the page, and that makes it stand out from those that just are like, oh, it was a meadow. Well, all meadows are different. Tell me about what your meadow is like. Next thing is that the ending isn't rushed. Unfortunately, with short stories, this happens all too often, where the ending, where everything's beautifully paced, and then all of a sudden they were like, and they defeated the wizard and they died. The end. Or whatever. I've just made that up on the spot. You want to make sure that the ending isn't rushed and that it's given just as much quality time as the rest of your story. If you're worried about going over the word count, go back and see what is the least important in your story that your story can survive without, and delete that to give you more word count to lend to the ending. Because not sticking the ending is going to be so much more painful for the reader than it is going to be to skip some of the superfluous details. Last thing that I want to talk about is probably the most complicated one, so you don't really necessarily have to do this, but it does make your story stand out, is resonance. It's when you have a theme that makes the story shine. So for example, if you start the story talking about her fear of fire, and then by the end of the story she's gotten over her fear of fire, that's a theme. You can also do emotional resonance, where someone's going through something really, really difficult or something really, really amazing, and people can relate to that emotion or relate to that thing that they are going through. That is emotional resonance. A great example of emotional resonance is Avatar: The Last Airbender, not the live action, I haven't seen it, so I'm saying the cartoon, with Zuko, because of the fact that he just wants to be loved. He just wants to be accepted ultimately. But unfortunately, in his quest for acceptance, he's trying to gain it from all the wrong people instead of just being himself and gaining acceptance by being himself. And that causes an emotional resonance because there's so many people, and most people, I think, in their own lives just want to be accepted deep down and will do random crazy things to try and be accepted. And so as a result, that lends itself to an emotional resonance that makes the story deeper and more rich than your average story. Same thing with, like I said, if there's a thematic element, seeing her overcome her fear of fire is amazing, and it inspires us and it feels good. So as a result, it gives us more richness to that story. Alright, that's the end for today. Remember, the Scary Story Contest is due the first week of October, so please start working on it. The rules are different for this one because I am not in charge of this one, so please don't think it's a 6,000 word limit. It is not. The limit is 8 pages. They don't specify the font, they don't specify the spacing, so feel free to play around with that, but make sure the font is readable. Thank you so much, and I hope you have a great day.